There's a moment in every Sigma empath's life when the emotional overload becomes too heavy, too constant, too exhausting to carry. Not because they stop caring, but because caring has cost them pieces of themselves for far too long. And when that breaking point arrives, something inside them shuts down. Quietly, suddenly, completely, they go emotionally numb. This numbness isn't coldness or cruelty, it's survival. It's the mind's instinct to protect the heart when it has been stretched beyond its limit. And the moment a Sigma empath goes numb, everything changes because the version of them that absorbed everyone's emotions without question no longer exists. People around them feel the shift instantly. The empath who once sensed every mood, softened every conflict, and carried everyone's emotional weight becomes distant, unreadable, almost unreachable. Their silence feels different. Their presence feels heavier. They no longer react the way they used to. No more overthinking, no more rescuing, no more explaining why something hurt. Their emotional numbness becomes a shield, but also a message. I've given too much, and now I need myself back. And for the first time, the world must face the consequences of draining someone who has always been the emotional center. Before we dive deeper, I want to ask you something honest. Have you ever reached a point where you felt nothing? Not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much for too long? Tell me in the comments. Someone who feels numb right now needs to hear your story. And if this message touched a truth inside you, make sure you subscribe to Brainy Empath. This is where your heaviness is understood, not judged. If you watched until the end, type Numb shift so I know you're one of the Sigma empaths who has felt this powerful turning point. They stop absorbing others' emotions because their system has reached overload. Sigma empaths are naturally wired to feel everything. Every tone shift, every unspoken sadness, every hidden frustration in the people around them. For most of their life, they carry these emotions quietly, almost instinctively, as if absorbing the weight of others is simply part of who they are. They soothe tensions before they erupt, offer comfort before anyone asks, and sense pain long before it's admitted. But there comes a moment, often after years of emotional labor, when their inner system hits a breaking point. Not a loud collapse, a quiet overload. And in that moment, the empath's ability to absorb external emotions simply shuts down. They stop feeling what isn't theirs. They stop carrying what others refuse to confront. Their mind steps in to protect their heart, creating an emotional numbness that signals enough. This overload isn't weakness, it's survival. When a Sigma empath reaches this point, it means they have given far more than they ever received. It means they have been the emotional anchor for too many people for too long without having a safe place to release their own heaviness. It means they've listened to pain that wasn't theirs, fixed problems that weren't theirs, and held on to burdens that were never reciprocated. Their numbness arrives not because they want to disconnect, but because their spirit can no longer function under the constant weight of feeling everything for everyone. Their emotional receptors, once sensitive and open, begin to shut down to prevent further damage. And in that shutdown, the empath finally experiences a world without the constant flood of other people's feelings, a world that feels strangely quiet. People around them notice the shift almost immediately. The empath who once anticipated their needs no longer responds with the same warmth. The one who could feel sadness from across the room no longer reacts. The emotional sponge has stopped absorbing. And those who relied on the Sigma empath's sensitivity might panic, confused by the sudden distance. What they don't understand is that this numbness is a defense mechanism, a necessary pause, a crucial reset. For the first time, the empath system prioritizes self-preservation over emotional service. The numbness becomes a barrier, filtering out energies that once consumed them effortlessly. As this emotional overload settles, something transformative begins. The Sigma empath, no longer distracted by the noise of everyone else's feelings, can finally hear their own. They begin noticing what has drained them, who has taken advantage, and where their emotional boundaries were too thin. The numbness becomes clarity. The silence becomes space. And in that space, they start rebuilding their inner world without carrying the weight of others. They stop absorbing, not because they have lost empathy, but because they are reclaiming themselves. This is the first shift in a powerful transformation that will change everything moving forward. Their silence becomes a warning sign, not distance, but exhaustion. When a Sigma empath stops talking, stops explaining, stops reassuring, and falls into a quiet stillness, people often misinterpret it as coldness or withdrawal. But their silence is rarely about distance, it is about exhaustion. It is the final stage of emotional burnout, the moment when they have given so much of themselves that there is nothing left to pour. Sigma empaths are masters of communication through energy, tone, presence, and intuition. When they fall silent, it is not because they're trying to punish anyone. It's because they can't carry the emotional weight any longer. Their silence becomes a warning sign, a subtle but powerful signal that they have reached their limit. This silence is not empty. It is heavy with everything they've been holding in. It carries the weight of the conversations they had to lead because others refused to be honest. It holds the echoes of every emotional burden they absorbed, every hidden sadness they comforted, every unspoken conflict they resolved. Their silence is a plea the world often fails to hear. I need rest. I need space. I need something to stop. And because Sigma empaths are so emotionally intuitive, their silence is rarely accidental. It is the body's way of shutting down the noise so the heart can breathe again. People who relied on the Sigma empath's constant emotional presence feel this silence immediately. The ones who always turn to them for understanding suddenly find the empath unavailable. The ones who depended on their warmth now face a coldness they were never prepared for. It feels like distance because they are no longer receiving what they once took for granted. But the truth is more compassionate and more painful. The empath is not pulling away from them. They are retreating into themselves to survive. Silence becomes the only space where they are no longer absorbing, fixing, or healing others. Inside this silence, the Sigma empath begins to see everything clearly. The noise of the world quiets down, and their intuition sharpens. They begin to notice who only reached out when they needed something, who drained them without giving back, who mistook their unending empathy for emotional availability. The exhaustion becomes wisdom, the numbness becomes clarity, and in this clarity, they begin to choose themselves for the first time in a long time. This silence marks the beginning of transformation. It is the empath's way of resetting their emotional boundaries, gathering their strength, and reclaiming their peace. Their silence is not rejection, it is a whisper of survival, a signal that they are finally stepping out of the role that drained them and returning to the self that needs healing. And once a Sigma empath enters this stage, everything around them begins to change. They detach to protect themselves when empathy becomes too painful. Sigma empaths don't detach because they stop caring. They detach because caring has become too heavy, too constant, too painful to hold. Their empathy was never meant to be a burden, but over time, absorbing everyone's emotions, healing everyone's wounds, and carrying weight that wasn't theirs begins to tear at their spirit. When that breaking point comes, their mind does something powerful and instinctive. It disconnects, not from love, not from humanity, but from the emotional overload that is suffocating them. Detachment becomes their shield, a survival mechanism designed to protect the parts of themselves they once sacrificed freely. This emotional detachment is quiet and misunderstood. People around them suddenly feel a shift. The empath who once listened deeply now seems distant. The one who once held space for others now pulls away. The one who once felt everything now feels nothing at all. But this numbness is not indifference. It is a sign that their soul has been stretched beyond its capacity. It is the result of giving too much, too often, without rest, without reciprocity, without anyone realizing how exhausted they truly were. Detachment becomes the only way to stop the emotional bleeding. It is the empath saying, if I don't step back now, I will lose myself completely. While detached, the Sigma empath begins to see the world differently. Without the fog of constant emotional stimulation, they gain an elevated clarity. They observe people's true intentions instead of the excuses they once made for them. They see the relationships that drained them, the situations that used them, and the individuals who relied on their empathy without giving anything back. Their detachment is not coldness, it is revelation. For the first time, they are able to examine their connections without emotional bias, and what they discover often confirms what their intuition quietly sensed all along. They were carrying far more than anyone ever noticed. As they remain in this detached state, something beautiful begins to happen. They feel themselves returning to themselves, their needs, their desires, their identity outside of what others expect from them. They rediscover their inner peace, the quiet strength beneath their sensitivity, the truth of who they are beyond the emotional chaos of others. Detachment becomes healing. It becomes space. It becomes a boundary that allows them to rebuild without being constantly pulled apart. And once they rise from this phase, they emerge stronger, clearer, and more selective about the emotional access others receive. This is why the detachment of a Sigma empath changes everything. It marks the moment they stop sacrificing themselves in the name of empathy. It marks the moment they begin valuing their own emotional well-being. And it marks the beginning of a transformation where their empathy becomes a gift again. No longer a wound, no longer a burden, but a powerful force they now protect with a strength no one can shake. Their numbness is a reset, a moment where they reclaim their energy. When a Sigma empath goes numb, it is not the end of their emotional capacity, it is the beginning of a reset. Their numbness is the mind pulling the emergency brake, the heart drawing its final line, the soul stepping in to say, "You cannot keep giving like this." For years, they poured their energy into broken people, unstable dynamics, and emotional fires that were never theirs to put out. They carried burdens that weren't theirs, felt emotions that didn't belong to them, and held together situations that would have collapsed without their strength. But eventually, the drain becomes too great. Their emotional circuits overload, their intuition becomes tired, and their spirit becomes depleted. So their system shuts down, not to break them, but to protect them. Their numbness is the pause their soul needed to survive. In this numb state, the Sigma empath feels strangely disconnected from the world that once overwhelmed them. The emotional noise goes silent, the pressure to fix everyone disappears, the constant internal storm finally stills. For the first time in a long time, they are not drowning in the feelings of others, they are floating in a rare, quiet emptiness. It may feel frightening at first because they are used to feeling deeply, but beneath that stillness is something important: space. Space for them to hear themselves, space to breathe, space to understand how much energy they've lost and how much they need to reclaim. Their numbness becomes a protective cocoon, shielding them from further emotional depletion while their inner world begins rearranging itself. As they sit in this emotional pause, clarity begins to return. They start seeing who drained them, who took advantage of their empathy, who only appeared when they needed emotional support but disappeared when the empath needed anything in return. They see the patterns that exhausted them, the situations that overstayed their welcome, and the people who mistook their kindness for endless availability. Their numbness becomes a filter that reveals what their overwhelmed heart could not see before, and with every realization, they begin to pull their energy back, reclaiming pieces of themselves they gave away without noticing. Slowly, the reset begins to work. Their strength returns in quiet waves, their intuition sharpens, their emotional center realigns. They rediscover what peace feels like, what balance feels like, what self-awareness feels like. And in this process, their empathy becomes healthier, cleaner, more intentional. They no longer pour into everyone. They no longer feel obligated to fix what others refuse to confront. They no longer sacrifice their well-being for the comfort of others. Their numbness becomes the catalyst for transformation, a sacred recalibration that restores their power from the inside out. When the numb phase ends, they emerge different, grounded, steady, clearer than ever. They reclaim their energy, not as an open floodgate, but as something sacred, something earned, something protected. And this shift changes everything, because a Sigma empath who has reclaimed their energy is someone the world can no longer drain, manipulate, or break. People who drained them feel the shift most, because access is no longer unlimited. When a Sigma empath goes emotionally numb, the first people to feel that shift aren't the kind ones, the genuine ones, or the balanced ones. It's the drainers, the ones who took without giving, the ones who expected emotional labor without offering support, the ones who treated the empath like a bottomless well of understanding, comfort, and patience. Suddenly, that well closes. The endless availability disappears. The warmth they relied on turns into silence, and they feel the change like a door slamming shut, not violently, but definitively. For the first time, the drainers realized that access to the Sigma empath's heart, time, and energy was never guaranteed. It was given freely, generously, and now it's gone. People who drained the empath often convinced themselves the empath would always be there. They mistook compassion for obligation. They believed empathy meant endless tolerance. They assumed the Sigma empath's emotional support was something they were entitled to, not something they were blessed to receive. So when the empath's emotional numbness arrives, when the replies get shorter, when the conversations stop flowing, when the emotional labor dries up, it hits them harder than anyone else, because suddenly they aren't being fed, they aren't being soothed, they aren't being rescued. They are now forced to confront their own emotions without a buffer, and they don't know how to handle it. This is where the truth becomes undeniable. The people who complain the loudest about the empath's change are the ones who benefited most from their lack of boundaries. They feel abandoned, not because they loved the empath deeply, but because they lost access to a resource they depended on. They feel the absence not as a loss of connection, but as a loss of emotional convenience. And as the empath's numbness creates distance, these same people begin revealing who they truly were all along. Some grow resentful, some try manipulation, some attempt guilt, others silently drift away because there is no more energy left for them to take. The shift exposes everything. Meanwhile, the Sigma empath feels something different: relief, clarity, quiet. For the first time, they are not carrying the emotional chaos of others. Their numbness stops the constant leaking of energy and allows them to see who was draining them, who was genuine, and who was only present when they needed something. And this is where the evolution happens. Once the empath sees the truth, they never go back to unlimited access again. Their time becomes intentional, their energy becomes sacred, their boundaries become unshakable. The people who drained them lose the privilege they never deserved, while the empath finally begins to heal. This shift is why emotional numbness changes everything. It doesn't destroy relationships, it reveals them. It doesn't make the empath cold, it makes them conscious. And once a Sigma empath becomes conscious of who was draining them, that access is gone forever. The era of unlimited emotional availability ends the moment they choose themselves, and that moment is the beginning of a life they finally control. Emotional numbness awakens their intuition, revealing truths they ignored. When a Sigma empath goes emotionally numb, their heart may feel quiet, but their intuition becomes louder than it has ever been. The absence of emotional noise creates a clarity they haven't felt in years. For so long, their deep empathy clouded their instincts. They gave people the benefit of the doubt, excused red flags, softened harsh truths, and loved from a place of hope rather than reality. But once numbness settles in, the emotional fog lifts. Suddenly, they're able to see things exactly as they are. No more romanticizing potential, no more explaining away bad behavior, no more ignoring gut feelings to protect someone else's comfort. Their intuition wakes up like a sharp light in a dark room, revealing truths they tried to overlook. During this numb phase, the Sigma empath isn't reacting emotionally, they're observing. And what they observe often shocks them. They notice how one-sided certain relationships were. They realize how many times they were guilt-tripped, manipulated, or drained. They see the inconsistencies in someone's words versus their actions. They recognize the patterns of people who only showed up when they needed something. Needed something? Way to go. They didn't but manipulate it. Their intuition had whispered these things before, but their heart, so soft, so hopeful, so compassionate, drowned the warnings out. Now, with emotions muted and empathy paused, the warnings become undeniable. They finally understand the truth behind people's intentions and behind their own choices. This awakened intuition becomes a powerful internal reset. It forces them to confront the reality of situations they once sugar-coated. They begin to question why they tolerated certain behaviors, why they stayed in places that hurt them, and why they believed someone would change when all evidence said otherwise. Emotional numbness strips away illusions. It removes the emotional filter that once made them see people as they could be instead of who they are. In this raw clarity, the Sigma Empath starts making decisions based on truth rather than attachment. They begin to protect themselves, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Their intuition no longer competes with their empathy, it leads. And as this intuition strengthens, something transformational happens. They step into a level of self-awareness that makes them impossible to manipulate, deceive, or mislead again. They trust their instincts without hesitation. They walk away sooner. They speak up faster. They prioritize aligned energy, not emotional obligation. The truths revealed during their numb phase become the foundation of their new boundaries, their new expectations, and their new identity. Emotional numbness, which once felt like a breakdown, becomes their breakthrough. The moment their intuition finally takes the lead and guides them into a life where their heart will never be exploited again. After the numb phase, they rise stronger, clearer, and less tolerant of emotional imbalance. When a Sigma Empath comes out of their numb phase, they don't return as the same version of themselves. They rise with a new clarity that feels almost unrecognizable, even to them. What once overwhelmed them no longer shakes them. What once drained them no longer gets access. What once confused them now appears in sharp detail. The numbness they endured becomes the fire that reforged their spirit. Instead of collapsing under emotional overload, they emerge stronger, steadier, and unwilling to carry even a single ounce of imbalance. Their tolerance for chaos disappears, their willingness to overextend evaporates, and the softness that once made them vulnerable evolves into a strength that makes them unbreakable. This transformation is subtle at first. They begin saying no more confidently. They stop answering calls that once left them exhausted. They no longer chase people who only showed up out of convenience. They become intentional with every interaction, every commitment, every emotional investment. The numbness taught them what peace feels like. And now, anything that threatens that peace is removed without hesitation. Their heart didn't harden. It matured. It learned the cost of giving too much, too freely, too blindly, and now it gives with wisdom, not desperation. They can love deeply again, but they will never lose themselves in that love. They can care powerfully again, but they will never carry what isn't theirs to hold. As clarity grows, their life begins to shift dramatically. People who once relied on their emotional labor feel the difference immediately. Manipulators lose their grip. Toxic individuals lose their access. Energy drainers lose their supply. The Sigma Empath no longer entertains emotional imbalance in any form, not in friendships, relationships, family dynamics, or day-to-day interactions. They no longer accept being the therapist, the fixer, or the emotional dumping ground. Their healed self has boundaries that stand like steel, intuition that scans like radar, and self-respect that cannot be negotiated. They finally understand that balance is not a luxury, it is survival. And with this new strength comes a beautiful side effect. They begin attracting healthier connections. People who value reciprocity, people who communicate honestly, people who offer as much as they receive. The Sigma Empath's energy becomes a sanctuary for alignment rather than a magnet for chaos. Their calm becomes deeper, their focus sharper, their emotional presence more powerful because it is no longer diluted. This rising phase becomes the beginning of a new era, one where they no longer shrink, overgive, or break silently. They move with a grounded power that says, I know my worth now, and I will not return to anything that dimmed me. And this is why the numb phase is not the end, it is the rebirth. Once a Sigma Empath rises from it, they become a force of quiet strength, emotional clarity, and unshakable boundaries. They are stronger than before, clearer than ever, and absolutely done with anything that isn't balanced, mutual, or real. If you've ever felt yourself shutting down emotionally, not because you stopped caring, but because you cared too much for too long, then you already know what this transformation feels like. Emotional numbness wasn't your breaking point, it was your awakening. It was the moment your soul stepped in to protect you, to reset you, to rebuild you, and the version of you that rises afterward is not colder, but wiser, not harder, but stronger, not distant, but finally aligned with your own peace. When a Sigma empath reaches this stage, everything changes because they will never again carry the weight that once crushed them. Before you go, I want to ask you something honest. Have you ever felt yourself rise after going completely numb, stronger, clearer, and finally done with emotional imbalance? Share your answer in the comments. Someone who feels numb right now needs to hear from someone who made it through. And if this message spoke to something deep inside you, make sure you subscribe to Brainy Empath. This is where your emotional journey is understood, honored, and transformed. If you watched until the end, type reset mode. So I know you're one of the Sigma empaths who turned numbness into rebirth.